That night, I thought my brother had come into my room for a simple talk. I barely had time to react. He stepped inside, locked the door behind him, and before I could speak, he pressed in close and whispered something that made my whole body burn. After months apart, the tension between us finally exploded. And that night, everything changed forever. It all started when I came back home after being away for a few months. Not a long time, really. But when I pulled into the driveway, it felt like I was visiting a memory, not returning to my own house. The house looked the same, chipped white paint curling at the corners, the old oak tree still leaning over the front lawn like a tired giant. But somehow it felt smaller, like the whole world had shrunk without me. Even the air smelled different, sharper, unfamiliar, with a faint edge of loneliness. I sat behind the wheel longer than I meant to, gripping it harder than necessary, trying to work up the nerve to go inside. Before I could even reach for my bag, the front door swung open. There he was, my brother, standing in the doorway like he'd been waiting for me. For a second, just seeing him stole every thought from my head. He looked different, older, not just in years but in presence. His shoulders were broader, filling out the sleeves of a plain black t-shirt. His hair was messier than I remembered, but in a way that seemed intentional, like it belonged that way. His face had lost its boyish roundness. Sharp edges had taken their place, and the stubble shadow along his jaw made him look like he belonged somewhere I didn't. Then he smiled, wide and easy, and for just a moment, I could pretend nothing had changed. "About time, Squirt," he said, his voice deeper, rougher than I remembered. I huffed a laugh, forcing myself to close the distance between us. "Missed you too, jerk." He stepped forward, and before I could think twice, he wrapped me in a tight, grounding hug. I froze for a moment, startled by the strength of it, the way he lifted me slightly off the ground, like it was nothing. His chest was warm against mine, solid in a way that felt alarmingly safe, and dangerously unfamiliar. I found myself gripping the back of his shirt, holding on harder than I meant to. Maybe it was the time apart. Maybe it was just the shock of seeing him grown up. That's what I told myself later. He didn't let go right away. His hands lingered too long on my back, fingers curling into the fabric of my jacket, like he didn't want to pull away. And when he finally set me down, his hands trailed down my arms before falling away completely, leaving a coldness that made me shiver, despite the afternoon sun. "You look different," he said, his eyes scanning me like he was taking inventory of every change. I laughed awkwardly and shoved my hands into my pockets. "You're one to talk. What the hell have they been feeding you out here? You're huge." He smirked, flexing his arms in a way that made his sleeves stretch tight. "Hard work, little bro. Gotta keep the place standing while you're off pretending to be a city boy." His tone was light, teasing, but underneath it, something else simmered, something that made my skin prickle. I grabbed my duffel from the trunk and slung it over my shoulder. He took it from me without asking, tossing it over his with casual strength. As we walked toward the house, he bumped his shoulder against mine, a familiar, playful gesture. But it didn't feel the same. The contact was heavier. It lingered a beat too long before he pulled away. Inside, the house smelled like old wood and laundry detergent, like memories soaked into every surface. I stood there for a second, letting the familiarity wash over me, but it didn't feel right anymore, like a jacket I'd outgrown but couldn't bring myself to throw away. "You hungry?" he asked. "Mom made lasagna last night before heading out." "Starving," I said. My stomach growled in agreement. As we moved into the kitchen, I caught him watching me again, not the way a brother casually watches someone he hasn't seen in a while. His gaze was steady, focused, like he was trying to memorize me. Or maybe he was comparing me to the version of me he remembered and finding the new one unfamiliar. I busied myself pulling plates from the cabinet, pretending not to notice, pretending my skin wasn't burning under his gaze, pretending the air wasn't getting thicker between us, harder to breathe. He sat at the table, leaning back in his chair, arms folded behind his head, his shirt stretched tight across his chest. He looked relaxed, but his eyes were sharp. There was tension in his jaw that didn't match the lazy sprawl of his body. We talked while we ate, about nothing and everything. Classes, work, the neighbors, who apparently bought a new car and made a big deal out of it. I laughed where I was supposed to, nodded in all the right places. But part of me stayed curled up, tight inside, wary, hyper-aware of every small shift in his expression, in his body language. It was stupid. Just nerves, I told myself. Just the weirdness of being home again after so long. That's what I kept telling myself. Later, after the sun dipped behind the trees and the house settled into its familiar creaks and sighs, we ended up in the living room, tossing a football back and forth like we were kids again. The normalcy should have comforted me, but it didn't. It felt like a trap, like the walls were closing in, slowly tightening with every throw, every glance. At one point, he missed the catch. The ball bounced off his chest and rolled across the floor. He lunged after it, laughing, and I lunged too, colliding with him in a tangle of arms and laughter. He pinned me. He straddled my hips easily, holding my wrist down with one hand like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. For a moment, everything froze. I stared up at him, breathless, pinned beneath his weight. His face was just inches from mine. His grin faltered, shifting into something softer, something more dangerous. His fingers tightened around my wrists. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. Then suddenly he pushed off me with a laugh, ruffling my hair like he used to when we were kids. Still the weakling, I see. I forced a laugh, rolling onto my stomach to hide the flush rising up my neck. He didn't see it. He couldn't. The night wore on after that, but the feeling didn't leave. If anything, it grew. A heavy, humming presence in my chest that made it hard to sit still, hard to breathe. When I finally dragged myself upstairs and closed the door behind me, I leaned against it for a long minute, my heart pounding hard against my ribs. I wasn't just the little brother anymore. Maybe I never really had been. The first day back had been strange enough, but it was in the days that followed that things truly began to shift. Slow at first, subtle enough that I could pretend I wasn't noticing, but pretending only worked for so long. It started with the way he looked at me. At first, I chalked it up to simple curiosity, brotherly observation. I had been gone for months after all. Maybe he was just seeing what had changed. Maybe he was trying to bridge the distance that time had carved between us. That's what I told myself when I caught him staring at me across the kitchen one morning. The toaster hummed quietly between us. When I looked up, his eyes didn't dart away. He held my gaze, steady, unblinking, until the toast popped up and broke whatever invisible thread had been pulling us together. And it wasn't just the staring, it was the touch. Touch had always been a part of our language growing up. Roughhousing, shoving, punching arms. It had always been easy, simple, thoughtless. But now his hand lingered a beat too long on my back when he passed behind me. His fingers grazed my wrist when he handed me a glass, and instead of letting go, they paused, firm and warm against my skin, before slipping away slowly, like he was forcing himself to move. The worst part was that I felt it, every time. The heat of him stayed long after he let go, like a brand, marking me in places no one could see. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself it was just nerves, just the awkwardness of being home again. But the excuses started to crumble. Fast. One afternoon, we wrestled in the backyard, like old times. It was supposed to be fun, just a stupid way to burn off boredom. He tackled me easily, pinning me to the grass, laughing as I struggled beneath him. But when I stopped fighting, expecting him to let me up, he didn't. He stayed there. His body pressed mine into the earth. His hands circled my wrists again, exactly the way he had that first night. His laughter faded. Silence settled over us. When I turned my head to look at him, I found him already watching me, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark with something I couldn't name. After a moment, he let me go. He pushed off with a grunt, tossing me my cap like nothing had happened. But I stayed there, lying in the grass longer than I should have, staring up at the sky, feeling like the ground beneath me wasn't as solid as it used to be. That night, we ended up on the couch. A movie played in the background, but neither of us was really paying attention. I stretched out along the cushions, legs comfortably sprawled. He dropped down beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed. I didn't move. Neither did he. The space between us felt charged, heavy with something unspoken. His thigh pressed against mine. He didn't shift away. He let it stay there. Warm, solid. A silent challenge I didn't know how to answer. At one point, I leaned forward to grab the remote from the coffee table. When I leaned back, our bodies collided. It wasn't much, just a tangle of limbs, an awkward bump, but it left me half sprawled across him. My chest brushed his side. My face hovered dangerously. Close to the hollow of his throat, where his pulse beat, fast and steady. I froze. So did he. The movie played on, the blue light flickering across the walls, but neither of us moved. I could feel his heart hammering against my arm, or maybe it was mine, pounding so loudly it echoed between us. His breath hitched just once. Then he shifted, just enough to let me slide off him, without making it look like a retreat. We didn't say anything. I pretended to focus on the movie after that, but I couldn't have told you a single thing about it. All I could think about was the way his body had felt beneath mine. Too warm, too strong, too familiar, and yet so entirely foreign. I could still feel the ghost of his touch where our skin had met. Still smell the faint scent of soap and skin that clung to him. I hated myself for noticing, for wanting to notice. Days didn't make it easier. We kept finding excuses to touch. Brushing past each other in the hallway, wrestling half-heartedly in the kitchen over the last slice of pizza, standing too close when there was plenty of space to spread out. But it wasn't just the touches. It was the way he looked at me. Not like a brother should. His gaze was too heavy, too focused, like he was trying to memorize the slope of my jaw, the line of my throat, the way my mouth twisted when I tried not to smile. And worse, I found myself looking back. At first, I'd catch myself and force my eyes away, cheeks burning with shame. But it kept happening, in stolen glances, in long, slow looks that lingered just a second too long to be innocent. Every time I met his eyes, it felt like something inside me tilted, dangerously, like I was standing at the edge of a cliff I hadn't meant to climb. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment in my mind, every accidental brush of skin, every lingering look, every half smile that felt like a secret. My body ached with the confusion of it. The wanting and the fear twisted so tightly together, I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I wasn't supposed to feel like this. Not about him, not ever. But pretending it wasn't happening wasn't working anymore. By the fourth night, after another too-long wrestling match, another almost accidental tangle of limbs on the couch, I knew something for certain. Something between us was shifting, and neither of us was stopping it. By the time Sunday rolled around, the tension between us had become its own living thing, thick and restless, humming just beneath the surface. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that it was nothing, just the awkwardness of coming home, of trying to fit back into a life that had moved on without me. But deep down, I knew better. Some things you can't unfeel once they've taken root inside you. Mom and Dad had been planning their weekend getaway for weeks, some anniversary trip they'd been hinting at for months, and no amount of wishing could change the fact that they were leaving us alone in the house. I stood at the front window that afternoon, watching their car pull out of the driveway, tail lights disappearing down the street. A strange sinking feeling settled in my chest. The house seemed to sigh around me, the silence swallowing everything in their absence. But it wasn't a comforting quiet. It was the kind that left too much space for thoughts, for mistakes, for things that shouldn't be spoken out loud. When I turned back, he was already in the living room, tossing a football up in the air and catching it lazily. His shirt clung to his chest in the summer humidity, the outline of muscle and movement impossible to ignore. When he glanced up, a slow grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not the usual teasing smirk, but something slower, heavier, something that made my stomach twist. "Just you and me now, Squirt," he said, tossing the ball at me without warning. I caught it reflexively, clutching it to my chest like a shield. "Yeah," I muttered, trying to inject some lightness into my voice I didn't feel. "Try not to burn the place down while they're gone," he chuckled, low in his throat. The sound curled around me like smoke. No promises. We ended up outside, tossing the ball back and forth like we used to. The sun hung low, painting the sky in molten gold and bruised purple. At first, it felt almost normal. The easy rhythm of throwing and catching. The simple comfort of something familiar. But it didn't stay that way for long. He started throwing harder, pushing me back with each catch. I dug my heels into the grass, grinning despite myself as I matched his energy. But when I hurled the ball back with all my strength, he caught it one-handed, smirking like a show-off, and charged. I barely had time to brace before he tackled me to the ground, the breath whooshing from my lungs in a sharp gasp. We hit the grass hard, tangled together. His weight pinned me down. He laughed, rough and breathless, in my ear. And for a moment, neither of us moved. The world tilted. His body pressed along mine. All heat and hard muscle. Too much contact. Too deliberate to brush off as accidental. His hands found my wrists again, pinning them to the ground like he had before. But this time, there was no easy laughter to hide behind. His face hovered just above mine, close enough that I could see the tiny scar on his chin, the one he got falling off his bike when we were kids, close enough to feel the warm rush of his breath against my cheek. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. And for one horrifying, electrifying second, I didn't want to. He must have seen it. The panic, the confusion, because he pulled away suddenly, rolling off me with a groan. "Getting slow, little bro," he muttered, his voice tight, almost strained. I forced a laugh, sitting up quickly and brushing dirt from my jeans. My skin burned where he touched me, and no amount of scrubbing would erase the imprint he left behind. The sky rumbled, low and ominous, a deep, vibrating growl. A storm was coming. I welcomed the distraction. We headed inside as the first fat drops of rain began to fall, dotting the porch with dark circles. Thunder cracked overhead, and the house seemed to press in tighter around us. The walls closed in. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of rain and something else, something sharp and unspoken. Inside, we pretended everything was normal. We raided the fridge for leftovers, argued over what movie to watch, wrestled over the remote like kids again. But every touch, every glance, every breath was loaded now, buzzing with something I didn't know how to name. When he grabbed my wrist during one of our scuffles, his fingers tightened just a second too long. When he pinned me to the couch, laughing breathlessly, his hips pressed into mine, and my heart stuttered. My body betrayed me. I shoved him off harder than necessary, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Chill, man," I said, trying to steady my voice, trying not to shake. He laughed it off, sprawling across the couch like he didn't have a care in the world. But his eyes followed me as I stood, as I mumbled something about needing to check something upstairs. I didn't look back as I fled to my room, slamming the door harder than I meant to. My chest ached, hollow, bruised. Feeling was blooming in my chest, wild and confusing. I paced the small room, raking my hands through my hair, desperate to make sense of the chaos churning inside me. None of it made sense. It couldn't. He was my brother. And yet, I squeezed my eyes shut, dragging in a shaky breath. I had to get a grip. I had to stop letting my stupid, traitorous body feel things it wasn't supposed to feel. Nothing was going to happen. Nothing had happened. It was just roughhousing, just nerves, just the strange awkwardness of being home again after so long. I threw myself onto the bed, burying my face in the pillow and willing sleep to come, to wipe everything away, even just for a little while. Outside, the storm raged. Rain lashed against the windows. Thunder rolled in lazy, threatening waves across the sky. I focused on it, clung to it like a lifeline, trying to let it drown out the thoughts circling in my mind like vultures. I must have drifted close to sleep, teetering in that hazy, weightless place where dreams begin to blur with reality. That's when I heard it. Software almost hesitant, the creak of a floorboard in the hallway. My heart lurched. I sat up slowly, every nerve snapping awake. I stared at the door, wide-eyed, barely breathing. Another step, closer now, the gentle pad of bare feet against old wooden floorboards. He was out there, just beyond the thin line of light at the bottom of the door, And I didn't know what I wanted more. For him to knock, to come in, to say something that would make this terrible, beautiful confusion make sense, or for him to walk away before everything broke. I clutched the blanket tighter, my heart slamming against my ribs, my throat dry as dust. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Then the doorknob turned, just slightly as if testing whether it would open. I squeezed my eyes shut, my whole body locking up, waiting. That was the beginning. The knob turned again, slower this time, deliberate. Sure. My heart stuttered violently. I stayed frozen under the blanket, half sitting, half curled, staring at the door as if I could somehow keep it closed just by looking. The floor seemed to shift beneath me. The air thickened, sticky and slow in my lungs. The door creaked open with a low, aching groan, and a thin slice of hallway light spilled into my room. He stepped inside, silent, barefoot. His hair was tousled, like he'd been pulling at it. His t-shirt clung to his chest, damp at the collar, like he'd been pacing. His chest rose and fell unevenly, like he was holding something back, something heavy. He just stood there in the doorway for a moment, staring at me, like he didn't recognize me. Or maybe like he did, but wished he didn't. His expression was unreadable, raw. Then his hand reached behind him, almost unconsciously, and found the door. Without breaking eye contact, he pushed it shut with a soft final click. The sound echoed through the room, louder than the thunder outside. I didn't move, just watched, helpless, as he reached for the lock. His fingers trembled, but he turned it anyway, sealing us in together with a quiet, merciless snap. I sat up sharply, the blanket pooling around my waist. My heart pounded so hard in my ears, I could barely hear anything else. The walls seemed closer, the ceiling lower, the air between us so thick it felt like I was breathing through cloth. He stayed by the door a moment longer, his hand resting against it, as if he needed something solid to steady himself. Then slowly, almost painfully, he pushed away and crossed the room. One hesitant step at a time. He stopped at the edge of the bed, close enough that I could feel the heat of his body bleeding into the space between us. Close enough that I could smell the faint scent of soap and the subtle, earthy smell that was just him. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. He lowered himself to his knees beside the bed, sitting back on his heels. His fists were clenched against his thighs like he was physically holding himself back. Then he tilted his face up to me, and the look in his eyes nearly undid me. Desperate, aching, terrified. His mouth opened, then closed again. He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing visibly. And when he finally spoke, his voice was so broken and raw, it barely sounded like his own. "I can't pretend anymore," he whispered. The words hit me like a blow to the chest, knocking the air clean out of my lungs. I gripped the blanket so tightly my knuckles ached, trying to anchor myself to something, anything, but the room spun, narrowing until there was nothing left but him, kneeling, shaking, destroying both of us with 5 small words. He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering himself, then opened them again. They shone in the dim light from the hallway. Whatever he was feeling, it was too big to hide. It poured out of him without mercy. "It's always been you," he said. The confession cracked out of him like a bone breaking through skin. Shock hit me first. Sharp, cold, disorienting. I couldn't process it. Couldn't file it away under anything that made sense. Because brothers didn't say these things. Brothers didn't feel these things. But underneath the shock, something else had started to rise. Fast and hot and terrible. It was something else entirely. As horrifying as it was, a part of me felt relief. The tight coil in my chest began to loosen, as if some invisible weight I'd been carrying my whole life had finally been named and lifted. I hated that part of myself, hated it so much I wanted to crawl out of my own skin. But it was there. I couldn't deny it. He moved closer, the mattress dipping slightly beneath his weight. His hand rose halfway, trembling in the charged air between us. For a terrifying, dizzying moment, I thought he was going to touch me, thought he would close the last few inches and destroy whatever fragile boundary still stood between us. And God help me, I wanted him to. His fingers hovered inches from my cheek, close enough that the heat of him brushed my skin like a whisper. Close enough I could almost feel the calluses on his fingertips, the roughness, the softness, imagining how it would feel if he let himself touch me the way he clearly wanted to. But at the last second, he stopped. His hand trembled there, suspended for a breathless moment, before curling into a fist and dropping uselessly into his lap. He bowed his head, pressing the heel of his palm to his forehead, like he was trying to physically scrub the shame out of himself. His entire body shuddered, every line of him pulled tight with guilt, want, and fear. "I'm sorry," he rasped, barely louder than the rain rattling against the window panes. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I didn't know what I would have said, even if I could speak. The words weren't big enough, weren't brave enough to fill the aching space between us. We stayed like that, locked in unbearable silence. He knelt, trembling, fists pressed against his thighs like he could hold himself together if he just tried hard enough. I was frozen, my heart thudding painfully, torn between running and reaching out. Outside, the storm rumbled low and steady, filling the room with its mournful voice. Rain hammered the windows in a relentless rhythm that matched the frantic, chaotic beat of my pulse. Still, neither of us moved. Still, neither of us dared to close that final, shattering distance. The air between us buzzed, alive with every word we couldn't say, every feeling we couldn't name, every breath we stole from the wreckage. And somehow, in that suspended moment, I knew. We were already too far gone. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was caught between the instinct to flee and the overwhelming, aching need to stay. And then, he reached out, slowly, hesitantly. His fingertips brushed my cheek so lightly I might have imagined it, if not for the way my skin burned beneath his touch. I didn't pull away. Instead, I leaned into his hand, a soft, broken sound catching in my throat. His breath hitched. His eyes searched mine, desperate, pleading, as if waiting for me to push him away, to end it before it truly began. But I didn't. I reached for him, clumsily, shakily. Fisting the fabric of his t-shirt at the collar, I pulled him toward me with every last ounce of strength I had. He crashed into me with a gasp. Our mouths met in a kiss so fierce, so desperate, it knocked the last shred of sanity from my mind. His hands framed my face, rough, trembling, pulling me deeper, closer, like he couldn't breathe without me. The kiss was messy, frantic, fueled by months, maybe years, of buried longing we never dared to name. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't soft, it was raw, hungry. The kind of kiss that bruised, burned, branded. I kissed him back with everything I had, clinging to him like he was the only thing holding me together. His mouth was hot on mine, his hands slipping into my hair, trailing down my spine, over my ribs, as if he needed to memorize every inch of me before we lost ourselves again. He guided me gently down onto the mattress, following without breaking the kiss. His body pressed against mine, a knee nudging between my thighs, our legs tangling clumsily. Our breathing grew ragged. The bed creaked softly beneath us, until we did the deed. When we finally pulled apart, it wasn't because we wanted to. It was because we had to. Breathing had become a battle we were both losing. Still, he didn't move far. He stayed close, forehead resting against mine, our noses brushing, our breaths mingling in the air between us. His fingers laced through mine, grounding us both in the reality we just created. A reality neither of us could run from now. I felt his heartbeat wild beneath my palm where it pressed against his chest. Felt the way he trembled with everything he couldn't say. And I knew, without a word, that he was just as scared as I was, just as unwilling to let go. No words passed between us. There was no need. Everything we might have said was already written into that kiss, into the way we clung to each other, breathless, broken, whole in ways we'd never been before. He cupped my face again, his thumb brushing my cheekbone, reverent, disbelieving, like he still wasn't sure I was real. I closed my eyes against the sting there, turning my face into his touch, feeling the weight of what we had just done settle deep in my chest, but also feeling something else. Relief, acceptance. Something old, scared, caged inside me had been set free the moment his lips touched mine. And now that it was free, there was no stuffing it back into the dark. He shifted beside me, pulling me into his arms until my head rested on his chest. I could hear the wild thunder of his heart. He buried his face in my hair, breathing me in like he was trying to memorize every part of me. And I let him. I curled closer, wrapping an arm around his waist, feeling his body slowly relax against mine. Outside, the storm raged. Rain battered the windows in wild, furious waves. But inside, in our small, fragile pocket of space, everything was still. Everything was real. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, tangled together on the bed, bodies pressed close, sharing the same breaths, the same fear, the same impossible, undeniable love. He didn't run. I didn't push him away. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. He had locked the door behind him that night, sealing us away from the world. But in truth, what he really did was unlock something inside me that would never go back to sleep. What now? Where were we supposed to go from here? How could we face each other, face ourselves, knowing the world would never understand? I didn't have the answers. Maybe I still don't. All I know is something irreversible happened between us, something beautiful, something terrifying, and no amount of regret or wishing could ever undo it. If you were standing in our place, what would you do? Would you walk away and pretend it never happened? Or would you stay, no matter the cost, no matter the consequences? Let me know in the comments, because honestly, I'm still trying to figure it out myself.